Uh-huh. Welcome, everybody. So we are here. This is the third series third video in our series on anti-racism. And tonight I'm really excited because I searched wide and far for educators who would be able to talk around just teaching U.S. history, teaching history from an anti-racist lens. So before we start, guys, in the comments, I need you to put where you're from, and all of our guests, go ahead and tell us who you are, where you teach, and what you love about history. Anybody can go.
I'll go first. So my name is Tamara Russell. I'm a nationally board certified middle childhood generalist from Orlando, Florida. I teach third grade. I'm going into my 24th year. So the thing I love about teaching social studies to littles is that I can integrate it with other subject areas, and it's a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to our discussion tonight.
Yay. Thank you, Tamara. Okay. Who's next?
I can go, guys. How you doing? I see my friend from Jackson is on the line. I am a proud native of Mississippi, although we took way too long to change the flag. We went ahead and we were able to do it. I am a high school English teacher for 10 years before going into central office administration, where I served as a K-12 literacy coordinator, a curriculum director, and I'm now an educational consultant. And I work for an educational resource company as an account executive. Zachary Kirk, happy to be here with you, friend.
Thank you.
Well, I'm Hodge Womack, and I've been an educator for 19 years. I'm now an education consultant and specializing in leadership and teaching education. The other aspect, I'm also a CEO of Innovative School Tools, an ed tech company. So that's what I do now, and I'm just excited to be here to share how we can teach U.S. history in an anti-racist format.
Absolutely. Adam or Kine?
I'll go. I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me? Can you hear me now, friend?
So yeah, Adam go, and then Kine, then you go.
All right.
Okay.
I'm Adam Sutton. I currently teach here in Baltimore County, Maryland. I'm actually transitioning. I was a middle school teacher for the last 3 years, taught 8th grade U.S. history. And I'm going to now go back to high school, where I spent the first 9 years of my career. And I'm going to teach 11th grade and 12th grade. So I'll be teaching a little bit of U.S. history and a little bit of economics. So I'm kind of shifting gears. And I think that experience of middle school has been really informative. And so, so I'm entering year 13 as an educator. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Kine?
Okay, my name is King Walker, a.k.a. Mr. Awaken the Genius. This is my 24th year in education, and I teach at the South Atlanta High School on the south side of Atlanta, Georgia. I will be teaching 3DE in my favorite subject, ethnic studies, this year. I was a former entrepreneurship teacher as well as youth entrepreneurship teacher. And I'm just excited to be on this call tonight with this great host, this great cast of characters that you have tonight, Fran. So I'm looking forward to sharing anti-racism because I live it every day.
Yeah. And I think that, and one of the reasons, guys, that I picked these teachers was because I wanted to be clear around that the work is massive, right? And there's so much work to do. And before we went on, we were talking about, who we like to read. But I want to start around the notion of social studies as being, for some people, not us, but being that it is a throwaway subject. And I'm going to say that because I know people have already turned their lip up, but people have kind of put social studies as, oh yeah, we'll teach it. So talk to me around, how do we get to the point where social studies is not a subject that every kid gets really in depth? How do we get there?
Fran, as part of the course of our times together, I will jump in and start off because you immediately hit on a passion point that simply infuriates me. I'm going to answer your question because you said, how do we get to this point? We got to this point because of standardized testing and the failure of school systems and school leaders to understand the value of a holistic education. And also, and to constantly want to play triage around failures in the system instead of trying to holistically fix the system and keep the system healthy. That's how we got here. And it starts in elementary school all the way up. As a curriculum leader, I have heard school systems and school leaders say things like, we can throw it all in, science and social studies end up literacy block. So social studies, history standards have to be explicitly taught, and you have to explicitly employ best practices in the field of social studies in order to have students master those standards appropriately. So, and there is, when you fail to teach any content area, or you give any piece of the essential curriculum its lack of due diligence, you are doing a disservice to the child.
Hey, who else? He said failure, guys. He said it is a failure of school systems. Who else owns some of this failure of the lack of teaching social studies?
Teachers, we do, because we didn't fight for it and we let it go. I tell you, in Florida, like in third grade, it's reading and math. In fourth grade, it's reading, writing, math. In fifth grade, it's reading, writing, math, science. So social studies doesn't have an assessment. So that's the subject that when you need to spend more time on reading, you don't. And to Dr. Kirk's point, if you need to learn the states, you won't learn them because there's just no time, right? So standardized testing is the elephant in the room, but if anything informs us about the period of time that we're in, this is now the time for teachers to begin to start to push back on some of these things that we've just kind of allowed. There's a martyrdom in teaching. There's a victimization in teaching. Like, we just don't know what else to do. We just can't. That now you're starting to see a shift in. And so my prayer for this time period, particularly with elementary school teachers, is that we'll start to unpack and unlearn and get invested in pressing these issues in classrooms. So that's my hope as an elementary school teacher.
Now, go ahead, Haj.
One thing I want to just add to that, and I agree with you, Tamara, that it is teachers, because the way we taught it, the way I learned it in high school was rather boring. History was boring, so therefore, why go into a college for looking for a college degree to major in? Well, then even if I'm teaching education, why should I learn and have it as a minor when it was taught to me boring? It wasn't related to me. It wasn't in an engaging way or taught by a passionate teacher who loved the subject of social studies. So therefore, it is a teacher's fault, not only us, the current teachers, but also generations of teachers not really teaching it in an engaging way where it excites students that want to major and master it and then ultimately teach it themselves.
Isn't it intentional?
I promise you, I won't say much, but you shouldn't have started off with something that I care about so much. Like you hit me hard because, people, to everybody on the call, is Finland a part of Russia? Is Finland a part of Russia? Can't the United States just take over and run Venezuela? These are questions that our president supposedly asked John Bolton that were reported in the book that came out on Tuesday. And the fact that the leader of the free world doesn't know these simple things indicates and illustrates the value of early social studies education. I learned about Finland in elementary school. I think I was in fifth grade. The fact that educators believe at any level, whether you're a classroom teacher or you're a district office superintendent, if you believe that we can devalue social studies, you are living in a time frame and seeing the evidence of its failure to become a part of anybody's core education when you simply listen to the rhetoric of our president. Woo. I'm gonna mute. I'm not gonna say I'm muting. I don't want to take it down that road.
Well, I take it down that road. I take it there. I will take it there. Lies. My teacher told me everything my American history textbook got wrong.
There you go.
So if you want to go down that road and throw the alley hoop to me, I will catch that alley hoop and I will dunk it. When we said teachers are to blame, I lost my job in 2004, 2005 in Fulton County because I was teaching too much Black history at a Black school with a Black principal. So when you ask, what is the problem? When the president says he will defer to the president of Puerto Rico, and he doesn't realize that he is the president of Puerto Rico. You got kids who are coming on to our campus every day saying, Ms. Walker, I'm from Puerto Rico. Our president is the president of the United States, right? And I'm like, yes. So I think geography, which my district right now, we're not requiring geography anymore as a requirement. So I want you to think about that. People are not paying attention. You just cannot say we're going to teach geography as a part of U.S. history. We really need our students to understand. If you're talking about University Avenue, where the Wind is like the home of the new monument to Rashard Brooks, students need to know if you're dealing in your math class and we're talking about doing parallels or we're talking about how you do the X, Y axis and whatnot, all of that is a part of geography also. So when you want to make social studies relevant, the first thing I would say is we have a president of the United States right now. And this is not political. This is just me speaking from the vantage point of loving our country, who I don't even think could pass my American government class. Listening to some of the empty rhetoric, and you have districts all over the United States who actually keep removing us. So the first thing is, until we deal with the fact that we have an electoral college that determines who's going to be sitting in the White House, and people stop talking about Black folks need to get out and vote. Hence, I brought my Black Voters Matters for sign today. All of that stuff right there, friend, like Doc said, I just hit the pause button right now. It's really important because social studies is the only class that you can take the course that semester and walk out into the community and use every single thing you learned in the previous semester.
There you go. There you go.
Adam?
Well, yeah, I was just kind of, people brought up like standardized testing as a fault here, kind of because if you get tested, then you're important. And so social studies, not a federally mandated testing area. But here in Maryland, we kind of actually just earlier this summer had an interesting conversation because we are a required tested area for graduation here in the state of Maryland.
Oh, wow.
So that puts us on par with English, math, and science. And so I kind of got into an interesting spot earlier this year because with COVID, testing becomes incredibly unfair and inequitable. And so we kind of, a group of teachers and we've kind of fought against the testing mandate for the graduation cohorts that are going to be affected by COVID. And then, me and another guy were like, let's, this just kind of speaks to the problem with standardized testing. And if you can't remediate students who struggle, then that's not a fair system, that you don't have a very good system in place if you're not preparing students and remediating students when they fall behind. And so I kind of like hearing the thing about standardized testing. It was kind of a unique thing because I agree, but then here in Maryland, we are tested. It makes us relevant, and I still don't like it because I don't want to be relevant because there's a test. It's kind of goes back to the point that Dr. Kirk made about having a holistic education. Like, how do we get to have a conversation about having a holistic education that doesn't rely on the importance of a standardized test to bring meaning? And I think that's a really hard question to answer, but a really great question to be talking about.
Let me tell you, the answer is just as simple, and it's in our hands. Right now, we ensure that this comes to an end. We have seen Zoomers lead protests that resulted in monuments of oppression being toppled. We have seen them take the most racist symbol that was a part of our nation's treason for 5 years and finally get it buried in the state that had the most lynchings in American history, my home state of Mississippi. We as educators have to start a systemic organized push to dismantle education and take away all of the elements of systemic racism that holds our profession back and that hurts our kids. And we have the greatest argument to make because what we do that's wrong hurts children. Yeah. Anybody who cares about kids and cares about all kids will be on board with dismantling this whole entire system to rebuild it and make it right. And making it right means taking away those standardized tests and holding that as an accountability measure that will not allow teachers to have the autonomy to do what they know is right for every single individual child so that every child can be his or her best through authentic, real assessments. We have to use this moment and call for the end of standardized testing, the end of how we are prioritizing certain elements. A gentleman just said that we've already gotten the word that math and ELA were the priorities. Math and ELA are always going to be priorities, but so will science and social studies and every other element of a holistic education. We cannot let anybody mandate that any content area supersedes another content area. We can't do it because we realize that the consequences are too vast. They're too vast.
Let me ask y'all this, because we are talking, it's 2020, and we are seeing with our own eyes how students, former students, young adults, people are saying no more. We are not going to have these symbols of racism in the middle of our towns to be celebrated. Do social studies teachers play a part in how confident kids are to overthrow what they deem not right? Does that make sense?
Wait, repeat that last part, friend.
So I want to know.
I was looking at Madison's comment, getting all excited. So.
And I think, Keena, did you hear me, Keena? I think you were going to respond.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, friend, if I can, I think what you're basically talking about as for students, I think we have to open up the curriculum. And one of the things I look forward to when I have my own school is asking first and foremost what students feel like is important that they need to learn when they come into the classroom. I'm looking at the comments also, Dr. Kirk. Somebody just talked about the standardized test and the standards being biased. And someone else also talked about sustainable development goals. One of the things we did with Verizon Innovative Learning is we used the sustainable development goal, and goal number one was poverty. If we're working in schools where the only time students get a chance to see the gold dome is when they're going to Grady to play a football game, that's a problem if you live in Atlanta. If you live down in Fourth Ward and you've never been to the King Center, that's a problem. So I think we have to open it up and make the classroom a liberated space where students can actually go down and protest without someone putting in their mind that, hey, according to the student handbook, you know you can be expelled. If any of us are real students of history down in Birmingham, Alabama, when A.G. Gaston was the financier of all the stuff that was going on, not just Dr. King, because we teach it, and here's that bias of the standards again. We act as if Dr. King and Rosa Parks are the only two black people that ever did anything to affect change in America. But you do not have a Martin King in Montgomery, Alabama, without having Joanne Robinson, who worked at Alabama State University, my alma mater. Yeah, you do not have a Martin Luther King down in Birmingham, Alabama, without Fred Shuttlesworth and A.G. Gaston. So I think, friend, to go to what these students need, we need revolutionary teachers like those ones on this call and revolutionary educators, ones like myself who are saying, I'm okay with losing a job. Because one thing that I ensure my students when they come in the first day of class that you can't high jump if the bar is set too low. So the one subject that we do focus on, two subjects, U.S. history because they're tested and economics because it's tested. I ask my students every year, what are you going to graduate to? Because a lot of you guys are going to be at graduation without an education. And you look at those production possibility curves in econ, the only class that they put emphasis on, those lines are not linear in the real world. So we can't put COVID-19 linear like this right here. There was a whole lot of stuff going on like this. And also I will conclude, because I want to pass the ball to somebody else, I will conclude by saying, I think it's time for a Stokely Carmichael type revolution in U.S. history. We got to make sure that everybody hear the book I brought. Y'all see I go to my book. Let's start talking about the radical Dr. King. From 65 to 68, you don't hear about Dr. King because this Dr. King was no longer talking all of that talk about we shall overcome someday. He was listening to what A.G. Gaston said down in Birmingham, Alabama, Black Titan, when he said, the fight that we're fighting, I see it, Dr. Kirk, he said the fight that we need to be fighting is an economic fight. So even the removal of those monuments, Dr. Kirk, I agree wholeheartedly, that's the first step. But until we start teaching our students to take back their neighborhood, because my neighborhood, South Atlanta, Cleveland Avenue, Jonesboro Road, gentrification is moving all of the people in that area outside of it. So it will be a great day in school when we start teaching in government what gentrification is for real and quit worrying about hurting people's feelings. So I think I'll stop right there because I can take this thing all the way to the goal line.
Let me take the ball from you real quick, if you don't mind. There's three things that I see that if we as educators really get down and dirty in, and that's three things. One, we as social studies teachers and educators, administrators, etc., is one, teach critical thinking. Two, have 2 notebooks, and I will expound on that in a few moments, and 3, professional development, where education is taught and social studies is taught with passion as well as real life components, real relevant components. So let me go to critical thinking. One, if we're teaching children to critically think and analyze about anything that's sitting in front of them, it will automatically have them challenging things. We can literally teach intelligence by teaching kids to question everything. And here's a series of questions in which you should ask every time something is sitting in front of you. Yes, I see that question behind the question. Absolutely. You're talking about multiple perspectives. You're talking about compare and contrast, multiple causation, all of those types of things and much, much more. Critical thinking skills will help a student challenge anything. And then the way we teach it deals with the professional development and how that these things are not isolated, dead history people or events that happened so long ago that doesn't have any effect on current day. We teach history as here's a time of George Washington or whomever, but not how that affects you as a person now or how it affects your people at that time. So the challenge that I have for educators is, one, find your student, your audience in the subject in which you're teaching. So if it's U.S. history, well, how did it affect Native Americans? How did it affect women? How did it affect poor? How did it affect, and then look at it and how it's contested. And I teach it as a series of contestations where everybody is vying for liberty, power, equality, liberty, power, and freedom. So if there all of these different entities are vying for this, if we teach it in that way, U.S. history and any social studies, then you have really engaging points and matters where these things come alive, these events come alive, and then we show how it mirrors today. My third point is what Maulana Karenga said, that we must have 2 notebooks when we teach in social studies or teaching anything. One for the standards that are required by testing and what we get a paycheck for, but 2 that teaches the actual history that goes on that's not in the textbooks. That's where you can get lies that my teacher told me, or you can get that came before Columbus, or you didn't get From Slavery to Freedom, or Vincent, There Is a River, or you can get in all a host of other books where you start talking about other people like the Nation of Islam, or like Noble Drew Ali and Marcus Garvey and all these other people that played a significant role in the struggle here in America, and any other aspect of history that you want to talk about. So we want to do it. Let me repeat 3 things. 1, teach with critical thinking. 2, professional development, where we're teaching it in a rigorous, relevant way that's really hands-on. And 3, having 2 notebooks, so we have the standards and then actual history, so we can make sure it all gets there.
Fran, I wanted to say just very quick and briefly, number 1, and I think this is something that Fran said in our last call, tell the truth. You can't tell the truth as a teacher if you don't know the truth. So you need to be well-read and you need to be well aware of what the truth is as a teacher. Absolutely. Standing in front of our children. So when you're talking about colonial America, you must know about the real colonial America.
That's right.
You know how history was influenced and shaped by Cotton Mather and his forefathers, his 2 grandparents, and how they sold slavery to generation after generation after generation in order for you to be able to even address that concept in your classroom. In addition to telling kids the truth, after you know the truth, you have to also show them the truth. And that goes to what my good friend Brandy said. Now, Brandy and I work together in Henry County. And on these calls, Fran, I think some people have said some disparaging words about the enterprise known as Teachers Pay Teachers. I want to go on the record to say that Zachary Kirk, I don't have a TPT page. I don't. But I am a fan of the venue for entrepreneurship because I believe that teachers need to be creative and to explore and to make more income. So I'm all a fan of it. But what I'm not a fan of is the cookie cutter look of it or the Disneyfication of education, as Brandy said. That's something that when I worked in Henry County, I would tell them, rip that stuff off the walls, take that nonsense down, stop showing these stick-figure people with these big giant bobbleheads, and show the children real images from history, because they see real images on television every single day. Our children are digital natives. They were born with a cell phone or an iPad in their hands. They see images that would appall us if we knew what they were. So they can handle the real historical images and the real photographs that will spark real critical thinking for our children. Know the truth, tell the truth, show them the truth, and then discuss this with the child so the child is able to come to his or her own critical thinking consensus around what they're engaging with. And again, you can do that through the C3 framework. It's laid out for
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And I get, one of the things that kind of, and somebody said this in the comments, and guys, the comments go fast. They're about to start. Somebody said, we are putting the comfort of adults first, not the education of students when we Disneyfy history in the classrooms. How do we address it? And I think Dr. Kirk made a good point in that he said, just even the pictures that we show of history, it was really important for me when I'm asking kids to write about James Baldwin or read something he wrote. It's important for them to see the pictures in color, because I didn't want kids to think that it happened so long ago that it was so far removed from them. And so when you get into this, what do we do to address this? Because, and Tamara, maybe, and you can speak about this. I know you're on Teachers Pay Teachers, about just the cartoonish that we've seen on some, that people tried to push history on. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So yes, I have to say, Dr. Kirk, I was a little triggered when I heard you say that, some folks out here like to make history cute. I don't know if it was elementary, middle, or high school, but I teach elementary and I felt triggered. But listen, I'm going to agree with you, because I think that that's coming out of elementary. I'll be honest with you. The majority of that is coming out of elementary. Elementary school teachers, and I'm talking to y'all because I'm still in the classroom, y'all. I'm with you, right? We have an issue with hard history. I have a blog post about this. I'll share it with you later, Fran, if you want to share it out. But we want to make every hard bit of history cute. We can't do that. And if Fran is asking us, and Dr. Kirk is asking us, and Haj is saying we got to tell the truth to kids, we can tell 5-year-olds the truth, but it's the way we do it. I'm not going to be able to tell the truth in the same way Adam might in his classes with his students. But what I could do with a kinder kid, what I do with my 3rd grade students, is we talk about the world around them, and I want to know what they're noticing. I do show them real life pictures of things. I will take a moment here and say, since we were talking a little bit about TPT, my girlfriends Naomi and Lanisha have a lovely set of Black centric activities for social studies. If you teach K-3 and you're interested in that, they do a wonderful job laying out difficult portions of history if you're looking for like some kind of a scaffold in elementary school. But that's the issue that we're having. That's number one. The issue is elementary school teachers have a hard time with tough history. Number two, our default is not to try to learn new stuff. I'm an elementary school teacher, but you will never hear me say, I just teach 3rd grade, or I just teach reading, or I just teach math. I'm really proud of the things I know, and I'm a professional. Elementary school teachers, we have to talk about our job with as much pride as the high school history teachers and administrators talk, right? We need to stop talking about what we do as if it is less instinctually than what middle and high school teachers do. They're reading and researching too. Why do we think we don't have to read and research? Because we teach 5 + 5 is 10? Like, no, we need to be reading. We need to be constantly driving ourselves. And as we're seeing now, elementary school teachers, the facts have been laid bare, right? The whole nation is watching and saying what we've been doing in history is not correct. So who do you think we're talking to? Like, do you think elementary school teachers don't have to read now? We have to read too. We have to now figure out, how do we take these issues? And I loved what Keena said about that liberatory pedagogy lens that he's coming from, because that works so well with kinder, 1st and 2nd. And I teach 3rd, and I do that in 3rd grade as well, where you can take that hard history and you get students to contextualize that in real life. Why can't 3rd graders protest? Because it's not in the standard? Why not? If you look at everything before Brown versus Board of Ed and look at what Black teachers were teaching their kids to do, you had 13, 14, and 15-year-old boys in Jacksonville sitting on Woolworths counters and protesting. 13, 14, and 15 years old when they knew they'd be arrested. How did they know how to do that? Because their Black teacher in their classroom was teaching that style of teaching that Keena was talking about, that we're right now. So this is why sometimes our kids are not activists. And the kids who are activists, I really believe they're getting it from a liberatory lens. I wish I could say blanket that it was coming from the schools, but I don't think it is. I think it's coming from after school programs. I think it's coming from liberatory teaching that's being done in clubs after school. I don't think it's coming from the classroom all the time. And that's unfortunate because it should be birthed in the classroom. And it can be birthed in an elementary school classroom. We just have to dream bigger.
So the other day, my 10-year-old, my daughter takes, she has a little whiteboard that she writes on her phonics. And my 10-year-old put Black Lives Matter. And I don't he hears me talking, but I guess he had done his own research. And I was like, Chase, I was like, who wrote this? And he was like, oh, I did. And I was like, okay, talk to me about it. So I wonder, as we're talking about this, are we really exposing kids to history so they know what they're protesting and what the background of it? And I love what you said, Tamara, around we have to become researchers ourselves. We have to be the students of history. And I guess I have to ask, how do you get a student to be a protester? I mean, to protest injustice. How do you get to that point? Adam, what do we do? What have you done with your students to show them that everything on the surface level isn't necessarily what it is?
Yeah, well, this is actually a really interesting conversation about changing the focus away from testing, right? And saying, okay, we're trying to get to authentic task. And what authentic task can student complete or engage in that is relevant, historically connected? And that conversation, I think, when you talk about teaching social studies, is because people have talked about the history of teaching social studies. It used to be a very name, date, fact-based kind of thing. We're going to know about these people and these dates and these events. And how do you transform that into something that, I think Ms. Washington in the comments had a post about, connecting history with present day matters. There's this linkage. You're not just studying Andrew Jackson and Native American removal as a separate thing that only existed in the early 1800s. You're trying to think how that system perpetuated and grew into what we have today, and how there's a linkage there. It's not just an isolated event. And how do we get so that we're saying, okay, hey, how are you going to enable students to be activists and to be leaders in their community? And I think that it's tricky because you're trying to empower, people that a lot of times people say, oh, kids don't want, they're lazy or this, that. But if you give them and empower them to do things, they'll pick up the ball and run with it, And so how do we get to have a system that does that? And it's, in my classroom, I've been trying to do over the last couple of years with my middle schoolers. One of the things that I think has helped a lot with it is we do a historical fiction unit, and they get a couple books that they can choose from, and it's worked really well for them to kind of mesh two things. So I use a very specific example around Thomas Jefferson. So we learned about Thomas Jefferson, writer of the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And then there's the Jefferson story of slave owner, plantation owner. And so they read, one of the options is they can read Jefferson's Sons, which is a fantastic book about his role as an owner of slaves. And they have to juxtaposition, okay, wait a second. We just read about Thomas Jefferson, the freedom fighter, and now he's owning people. And they have to, they get a chance to make sense of this. Because that's what it is, as a social studies teacher, is to help them see all the angles, of people, historians, and how their actions have lasted and influenced people to today.
And I think it's so important because my oldest son goes to school in DC, and this is probably a bad mom moment, but we were at one of the monuments, and they have the gift shop. And my son wanted something on Thomas Jefferson. He wanted something. And I said, Thomas Jefferson owned slaves, right? And he was in third grade. And he started crying. He was like, that's a lie. And I was like, no, he owned slaves. This wasn't real. And I think for him, he was because he loves history, he was just so shook. What? What do you mean? So.
But if you don't mind, Fran, the thing is this. we as the adults have to expose ourselves to history, yes, but then also expose our kids to it on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
One, the movies that we're watching. Are we picking movies that require students to pay attention to social studies and history? I mean, really, Apocalypto is one of a great Native a movie as well. Yes, you can criticize and analyze it. That's what we do in social studies. It's not that it has to preach this one thing. It has to be where we can critically engage that movie. I mean, we got all types of movies that we can go on and on about roots and so I'm going to blank here. 12 Years a Slave. We can go all any movie that you want to talk about. I mean, we can go anywhere and everywhere with it. But the point is that we need to take the time to say we're watching this movie, and let's read about it. Let's discuss it as we talk, as we engage this movie. So we're not just watching it for pure entertainment's sake. We're watching it, yes, entertaining, but also let's address it. I mean, we got all types of Mel Gibson movies that we can watch that are really entertaining, that we can then unpack and really deal with and charge and challenge with our real reading and history. The second part about it is those trips that we're talking about. How often are we taking trips where we say, yeah, we go on to this place, but we got to make some history or some education up out of this as well. This is a famous place for what? How does this relate to you as a person? So I studied Russian history, not all of it, but a nice amount of Russian history. But the point is that I like social movements. So I'm like, okay, well, I like studying social stratification and discrimination. So how in China, did they use foot binding as a way of putting women down, but yet maintaining this masculine society? So I was like, wow, look at this foot binding thing. And I'm loving every minute of it. So when I studied the Russian Revolution, I'm looking at, okay, how is it that this Bolshevik revolution pushed against this tyrannical society? And I'm looking at the social movement of it. So it's not just black or white or what have you. It's all types of challenging that we can live every single day. And to how do we make that in the classroom to where it's engaging? Is the C3 curriculum is one excellent way of doing it. But the second thing is that before there was C3, there was a History Alive. And where literally when we're teaching World War II, why are we sitting there talking about World War II and just reading it in trench warfare when we can literally line you up and let's see how you do trench warfare? Or teaching the factory system, let me teach you that factory system where you literally learn how to do a stick figure in a factory type system. And so you can see how the oppression and how people get upset. And it's experiential versus just me lecturing this situation. And that's where you'll get a lot more engagement, a lot more historical thinking, passion for history, and then, of course, ultimately challenging.
So I want to jump in real quick about some comments that I saw.
Yeah, you take it.
Okay, so there were some elementary comments. So, and you know I love elementary, so yay, elementary. Okay, so one of the things when you're asking questions about what do you do with little people, K to 5, right? One of the things you could start to do, teachers, is think about the natural order of the way classes run in elementary school. So a lesson I do every year with students, we talk about power and privilege. We talk about fair versus unfair. What do you think is fair? What do you think is unfair? And then we discuss the intersectionality of that. So we've had great conversations about, for example, we'll have a student say, I don't think it's fair that we can't play football on the playground. All right, we're going to write that down. Now we're going to look at how that impacts other people. Well, who's upset about that? The boys who weren't allowed to play football. Okay, but why were you told that? Well, because some people weren't safe. So is that a rule that you should advocate to me to change? How could you advocate to change that? What could you provide to me to convince me that I need to change that? These are their own structures. Kids are familiar with right and wrong. They're familiar with who has the power. If you ask any elementary school student who's in charge in here, they're not going to say themselves. I know that we always say that teaching is about the kids and it's a child-centered room. They're not going to say, we're in charge. They're going to say, you are, because they know that I'm the power broker. So if I'm the power broker in the room, I need to make sure that I'm constantly showing them power can shift with a movement. We create our own movement in the class. I've had students protest things in the classroom before. I've taught them about the history of protest. I've done model lessons before. We did a model lesson in my classroom. The last couple of years I've done it with the Birmingham bus boycotts. And I had all the students had paper money. And we modeled what it looked like, and we counted up the money and we graphed it and we charted it and we said, this is how much money theoretically we would make if everybody in this room was getting on the bus. Now some of you don't get on the bus. Now let's chart and see how much money is. What's the difference there? Now let's do that over 10 days, over 15 days, over 100 days. The kids could see exponentially there was power in not giving their money to something. So you transfer it into, what companies should kids not give money to? What companies do you think don't have your best interest in as kids? And then we take it into that realm. So kids can see it, but you have to present it to them, elementary school teachers, in a way in which they can feel it. Because if it's too cerebral and they can't touch it, they're going to be bored by that. It's going to be a great concept, but they can't touch it. They can't connect with it. So start with rules and regulations and procedures in your own schools. There's lots of things that are going on that are unfair. Kids will tell you they don't like that they have to cut their hair or they have to cut their dreads. They'll tell you uniforms are unfair. So then let's work on a plan to see if you can shift perspectives. That's liberatory pedagogy with little people. That's what it looks like with little people.
I love it.
And so also we had Dan talk about, and this is a real concern that comes up, I think, a lot, and it's a consistent thread across our discussions. How can you do any of this work when you teach in he called it Trumpy town. You're teaching in a community where it's not popular to say things that are not in alignment with a certain type of conservative ideology. How do you do that and still do justice to children? Because the future belongs to these kids. And to be honest with you, you're not going to have any progress in society if white children in all white schools don't learn these concepts and these issues, because they're the ones who are either going to perpetuate racism or who are going to end racism. My children are not going to end racism. They're not going to be the ones who are going to end it. They're going to be the ones who will be hurt by it. They're going to be the ones who will have their life chances and choices ended by it, but they're not going to be the ones who will end it. It has to come from white people, from white children right here, right now. So if you live in this world, number one, you really need to make sure that you are doing a good job of knowing the truth, telling the truth, and then showing the truth. But you have to take it a step further, Dan, and that you also have to engage your community and you have to educate them along with the children because they've been miseducated. And you have to help them understand and see the bigger picture and it's the bigger role that their children are going to play in making our society the society that it's really meant to be. And that takes a whole lot of work, and you're adding to a whole nother dynamic and dimension to what you do as an educator that goes far beyond your classroom. But if you really want to do this work and you really want to do it well, then that's the call that you're going to answer. You can do that through, like Fran talked about last week, parent universities. You can have special history seminars, bring in speakers, invite experts from the area to come in and talk about these things, allow discussion, allow discourse. You can use the C3 framework with anybody. Use that same framework to dissect what they think is the body of knowledge around historical fact to get to the real heart of what it really is by sharing those source documents.
And I think, it's important because we're in a time where people really fear losing their jobs, right? And everybody is not at a position to just quit their job. Everybody isn't in a school system where they can go and possibly get another job really quickly. But one of the things that we have to probably do is do a good job in making sure that we are pushing boundaries. So what does it look like in your community? Because I live in Atlanta. I can go work in 10 school systems. I can go to another, and it's easy for me. If I live in rural upstate New York, where it can really mean me not having a job. So what do you say to those teachers who are there? Well, let me ask you something a little bit further. How do you change? Administrators play a big part in this, right? A big part, because teachers are going to be asking you to take their kids on field trips. They're going to be making these plans. How do you support the learning when this needs to happen and you don't necessarily have the funds or know how to make it happen?
Well, Fran,
like Sarah said, is that an educator speaking? So definitely once Sarah expound on that. I'm not, if it was aimed at me, yes, I am an educator. I taught high school English for 10 years and I taught in a predominantly white school, 90% white, when I started working in that school, Eagles Landing High School in Henry County, Georgia. And I have been so blessed to have kids come on Facebook and say, if I hadn't have had you as a teacher, you were the only Black teacher I had. You made such an impact because I understand so much of what's happening right now because I had you as a teacher.
Yeah, and Adam, I think you were going to say something.
No, yeah, we're having this conversation about how you do this, and like I teach in right now. I my first 9 years as an educator, I taught in really all Black schools, and I'm coming from upstate New York, where I was a white guy in an all white school in a very rural area, and now I teach at a much more diverse setting, and I think one of the things that you got to think about as an educator is you are trying to show them, and Tamara talked about fairness. And one of the things that I got onto earlier this year wasn't just about fairness, but it was about power. And how do you show a kid, like we just assume that, oh, we all know what racism is. Like it's just, we just see it, we know it. And I think that that's a little bit like, as an educator, I think we kind of have to show what this power dynamic and imbalance looks like. And one of the things that, we did in my classroom earlier this year that I think really helped was we looked at 2 accounts of the Middle Passage. We looked at this account from a captain of a Middle Passage ship, Captain Phillips, and we looked at Olato Equiano, who was enslaved aboard the ship. And we see both these narratives. And one of the things that I really harped on the kids about was to look and see who has power in this situation. How is it that these 2 accounts can be decidedly different of the same event, and get them to think about what this power dynamic and how it's playing out in that instance? Because the kids really, they start to see, okay, this is the same thing. This captain here, he's termed a captain. He's like this respected person apparently with this title. And then we're talking about this Olato Equiano. We don't even say his name. We're saying slave. And like they see this dynamic, and they start to see like it's not just about beating bodies. It's also about this just dehumanization at a subtle level. That this guy gets to be called a captain, and this guy, he doesn't even get a title. And so I think that those are kind of things that I think about when I'm trying to teach these hard history moments, is who has power, who could have changed the situation, who could have done it different, And so those are things I would think if I was teaching in Trumptown, what types of things would I want kids to think about? And those are the types of questions I would ask them is, who has power, who could change the situation?
Perfect. And that issue of power, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, Fran, I started the year off, and I teach freshmen as well as upperclassmen. But I started the year off by letting my students get introduced to the book, The 48 Laws of Power. And it's a tough book to be reading, but The 48 Laws of Power is right in your face, and it actually gives them a chance to see power on the worst end of power, and it also gives them a chance to actually make up their own mind about what power would look like if they had it. So one of the things I would challenge everybody is, especially with what Adam was just talking about, let's quit using the word slave, because the word should be enslaved. Once you identify people as being slaves, you already make them subhuman. Those people were never slaves. They left those islands and they left the continent of Africa as human beings. Once we refer to them as slaves instead of enslaved, it's almost like with my students, I tell them, when you see those vans riding through Fulton County and Clayton County, and those vans refer to the people on them as prisoners, they have been imprisoned, not prisoners. If that makes any sense. I just wanted to frame that right quick. So how do we get our students to get engaged in the process of protesting? How do we get them to buy into taking control of their own education? Terrell, ask them to turn it down. One of the things I would say, ask them to turn it down. One of the things that I would say is this right here. When we're talking about empowering students to do these different things we want them to do, one of the things that I did this year was I gave my students a chance to do something we call a visual essay, and my students took that visual essay and they totally changed the rubric. For example, they did a scavenger hunt. So Equiano, I always talk about Equiano in isolation because I said he's one of those Negroes that one of the comments just came up on that said something about real-time learning. We can take real situations that's going on in current event and tie it in with history. So watch what happened. I asked my students, I said, I want you guys to create the rubric. How should I assess you on this micro teaching assignment? The kids said, well, first of all, Ms. Walker, most teachers, they us a rubric, and the rubric kind of limits you on what you can do. So I said, well, I want you guys to get together collectively, and I want you to make the rubric. Once they get that, one group did a scavenger hunt. And with that scavenger hunt, they had to go throughout the school building. And at the end of it, because I want to go step by step what happened, it started in my classroom. We followed them through the school. One of the things was they were talking about an enslaved person who had gotten injured. So that was a clue. They had to go to the nurse's office. The nurses, at the nurse's office, she told them like about malnutrition and so on and so forth. So they knew the next clue would be down in the cafeteria. But at the end, this was the most powerful part of the whole lesson right here. At the end of the scavenger hunt that they created, they ended on the back hall, and most of my students in the school, in my class, said they didn't even know that hallway existed in the school. And at the end, they had a chance to sign off, and they could change their names. I need you to pay careful attention to this. They now could change their names. Not one single student chose an African name. Even when the girl said, so why didn't you guys choose an African name? All of them kept their slave owner's name because it's all that they had ever been taught. And I literally went into tears. Now, that's example one. Example two, we have the deaf students at our school. We have hearing impaired and deaf students in my school. I have a girl who, she literally has like anxiety of speaking in front of the class. I told her in the real world, you gotta learn how to engage people. So this girl right here, I asked her, I said, what is a topic you could teach on that you feel comfortable with? She said, I really want to know more about Korea. She's a black girl from the inner city, Cleveland Avenue, wanted to know about Korea. I told her, if you're gonna do this thing right here and you're gonna get over your anxiety, it has to be something that you're passionate about, but more so than anything, I needed to empower the people in class that you're gonna be responsible for educating. This girl blew us away. Not only when she walked up to the class, everybody know the way she's walking today, she no longer has fear of speaking in front of the people. This girl taught about Korea. And since we had the hearing impaired students in the class, she actually went to Duolingo and learned Korean on her own. Not only did she learn Korean on her own, she learned how to add captions to the doggone PowerPoint so the kids who are hearing impaired could read along while all of this was going on. What does that have to do with real world learning and how we empower our students? What I did was, when she finished her presentation, I told her, you have broken the rubric. I could not have even prepared for what you did. Number one, I say all educators following us tonight, quit trying to dump information into your student's head. Great educators, based on what the word education is, we draw information out. So I drew out the Korean language. I drew out learning how to do captions on your own. I drew out how to teach kids who are hearing impaired. In the very next lesson, I conclude with this right here. The next kid who taught, he was a deaf kid. And so when we talk about gold, God, and glory, this kid right here, I don't know if y'all can see that picture of Minister Farrakhan. We came up, we talk about gold, God, and glory. I heard one of the comments Dr. Kirk, somebody just mentioned earlier, was about why do we keep making teachers comfortable while failing to give our students education? So I had a kid who came into class, a hearing impaired student, and he hit all of those tough topics. Talked about Minister Farrakhan, he talked about the Nation of Islam, he talked about the Rastafari, and the kids in the classroom were literally, once again, moved to tears. What is the gist of what I'm saying right here? When we step out the way, like we have done in my organization, Let Us Make Man, we have chosen to support these young activists who are out here protesting. We have decided that our role right now is to guide them and not to tell them how to do it. And when we decide that we can give up some of our power and stop being the sage on the stage, I think we're going to see the new revolution in education. And it all starts with this right here. It says black students, middle class teachers. It didn't say white teachers. It said middle class teachers. Jawanza Kunju, I think this will be required reading for all teachers. What it talked about in conclusion is this right here. Most of us on this call, we have children who have their own laptops in their room. They have their own printers in their room. They probably get driven to school by all of us in the morning. We make sure that they sit down and do their homework every day. But what do you do when you're in the inner city and you're dealing with kids who are taking care of their own little brothers and sisters? Some of these issues that we're talking about, if we just allow those little grown people, I like how Tamara said, the little ones, even those kids in high school, a lot of those are still little ones that have grown people experiences that they're dealing with every day. And I think they could teach us a whole lot about struggle and revolution if we'll stand back and just allow them to do what they'll do, which is awaken their own genius.
I think you spoke a word, Kenya, because when we're talking about awakening a genius, it's more than just opening a textbook. And somebody said this, I think this was Beth. Beth said, when discussing power, Who controls the narrative? Who controls the narrative requires us to have students look critically at the textbook, the voice of the information, the facts they've learned. We must teach students that the textbook is biased in itself. I like to use various resources like lies my teachers told me and compare it to the textbook. What information is excluded, whose voice or voices are missing, which goes back to y'all's point around who you have to be a researcher yourself to know that. If you're not researching the facts, you don't even know what's not true. You're still teaching that Columbus discovered America. And I see it all the time where this is what's being taught. And because we've been so programmed to get ready for tests, we think it's okay. Because, they're not going to be tested on that. But it has bigger consequences. I have to get to the point around, so we've talked about, what to do. We've talked about making it accessible for elementary students. What are some of because we've talked about anti-racism, but I also want to talk about our brown brothers and sisters, around other people that have been oppressed. How do I remember as an English teacher, teaching the Jewish Holocaust, but finishing it up with around how Africans were brought to America and enslaved, right? And we talk about the Rwandan genocide, and we bring it so they understand it modern day. How do you teach a curriculum that discusses oppression, but doesn't make kids feel that they don't get all down about who they are? How do you do that, Tamara?
Okay, so I wanted to answer, somebody was asking, how do you teach this in like Whiteytown, USA? I teach in Trump's America. The way that I do that is I interview the school that I'm working for. So I make sure that the administrator that I'm working for is someone who, even if they don't agree with everything I think, that they're willing to allow me to explore a process with students. So that's really important. And if you're not in a place, where you're allowed to do that, I would say you really need to consider working somewhere else, because you're going to end up losing your job. If you're in a position to where you're like, hey, if I lose my job, I lose my job, that's one thing. If you aren't in that position, you need to interview the school that you're working for. But going to this point, and Haj said this earlier, and I'm not going to talk a long time because I really want him to chime in on this. You have to teach history intersectionally. So when you're asking, your first point, Fran, was about how do you get students, like how do we center the voices of, let's say, for example, non-Black people of color. So if I'm thinking in terms of teaching like the Trail of Tears, there's an intersectionality there when we think in terms of like citizenship, right? So Black people at the time were informed that citizenship was important. We had that 3/5 law before. And so now Black people were thinking, if we could just be citizens, we need to be citizens, because anybody that's not a full citizen or has a full share is going to be treated badly in this country, i.e. like what happened to Native Americans on the Trail of Tears. So there's an intersectionality there that you can bring and show how in that same time period, what was life like for non-Black people of color. But the other way that you really bring in joy to the teaching is you allow students to explore culture. You talk about art, you let students emote, you listen to music, and you talk about how the music makes you feel. These are all expressions of Black joy that we can share with students. Every year I do a unit, I tweak it every year though, we do something on the Harlem Renaissance, and we talk about the different voices of the Harlem Renaissance, and like the artists and the actors and the stage performers, and I bring in all different kinds of things into that unit. We talk about Black people and what they did and the impact on greater, the South where we live, because I teach in Florida. But I also talk about queer people who led in those movements. Why? Because I want my students to see that there's an intersectionality to history, that there's multiple voices present. So many of the movements that we see, where we see people of color leading, is coming from our queer community. And so how can we bring those things to our students as well, without it being some kind of like, I want to say we just need to normalize these conversations instead of like breaking them in, to talk about the LGBTQ community. These are folks that had a big part of our history. If we're going to talk about political structures, movements, shifts in our country's thinking, a lot of those movements are led by folks from our LGBTQ community. And you can also show the joy, the passion, the pride, the love within that community.
Absolutely.
That's something to celebrate as well. And so kids get that feeling that there is, even in the midst of this struggle, there's hope, there's life, there's joy. So you can teach both. You just have to think about how to teach both and then go forward with that.
And somebody said something really important. They said this can be exhausting. A Black teacher, shout out to Ruth. I know her. Hey, Ruth. She said this can be exhausting. And I've been there as a teacher where it is so heavy that you kind of talk us through that. How do you sustain your mental health while still trying to teach accurate history, understanding that there is joy, but how do you do that? Anybody?
I'll go again. Oh, I'll let Adam go first, and I'll go after you, Adam.
So yeah, as a white guy, I feel weird because like I have really tried over the last few years to tackle race and gender, especially in my classrooms, and to be much more explicit about it. And so there is this like sense it gets really intense sometimes, especially if you have a diverse, I mean, it gets intense regardless who your audience is. But I think part of that is for teachers to say, hey, I'm going to try that. I'm going to go there. And I don't know that it gets easier, but I think you get better at it. And so I think that teachers have to feel, empowered to say, hey, I'm going to set the example here. And if I put a foot wrong, I'm going to come back tomorrow. I'm going to fix it. And to be open-minded to say, hey, I can make a mistake. But this also goes, I think Dr. Kirk was making the point about, you got to have relationships beyond just your kids. You got to have relationships with families and stuff like this. And all that is super hard and super time consuming. I get it. But you also, it doesn't excuse it as not part of your job. And so you gotta know that, especially now, I feel like we're in a moment of change here. And I feel like people have ears open that maybe didn't have ears open even 6 months ago. That doesn't mean everybody's got ears open. But I think that you gotta be empowered, and you're the leader. And when you're a leader, tough decisions come to you.
I love that. Anybody else?
One of the things that I've had to do over the years, I'm a people person. I don't know if y'all are Enneagram people. I'm an Enneagram 4. And I do love collaboration, authentic collaboration. I had to build my own global PLC. I have to tell you, it has been intensely difficult for me in this 23 years, 16 of which has been in the same district that I'm working in right now, to build relationships with colleagues, particularly when the foundation of how I teach comes from a liberatory lens. And a lot of the white women that I've worked with are very fragile and are not able to take it in. It is lonely a lot. And when I made the decision to just say, I'll have to go it alone, I realized for myself that that was not life sustaining. And so then I went on Facebook and I made a group. And I found some other teachers. And then I went on Instagram and I found another group of teachers. And now it's been 10 or 15 years. Well, it's been 12. It's been 12 that I've been on social media. And now I have a global PLC of teachers that I can talk to, that I'm willing to fly to and sit down and plan with. Why? Because the collaboration was important. So if you can't get it in your school, you may just have to be okay with being alone, but then look outside of that. Find, if you're a Black teacher, and I'm going to speak to specifically Black teachers, we need each other. So if you need somebody to talk to and you're alone in your craft right now and you're thinking, I want that kind of community, I want to be in a global PLC with Tamara, you can find me on Instagram and we can talk. And I know last time we talked, Dr. Kirk mentioned the same thing with him. Black teachers were better together. And if you're in a situation where you feel like I'm about to lose my job, I'm terrified, I don't have any friends, like, come and find us, because there's other people who think like me. I am not a unicorn. I know I probably seem like one on this chat, but I'm not. There's a bunch of teachers that look like me, that do what I do, and that do it in the same spaces where I've done it. It can be done to find people, but you can't always be by yourself. But that's what's helping me, is to cut off the people who I can't deal with. That's how I survive.
Yeah.
And if you're a white teacher, you can find me, right? So I think that it's really important for allies to feel safe and to feel empowered to ask questions and get answers and filter through things and even make mistakes on the journey of being an ally. You can come. I'm on Instagram, Dr. Kirk English. Happy to talk and engage with you around how you can be a better ally. And I'm so thankful that it was shared. If Tamara can talk about the LGBTQIA plus community in her elementary classroom, you can absolutely talk about Black people and racism in your classroom.
Absolutely. Haj, what do you say? Because Haj, you've been an administrator.
Yes.
You've been many years as an administrator. How do you, because people don't believe this, but working with principals and assistant superintendents and people are scared, uncomfortable. It varies from uncomfortable to scared, right?
Mm-hmm.
The range of emotions. How do you as an administrator support this work?
That's a good question. One, I just said, look, I live this experience. This is what we're going to do. This is just what we need to do. One, I don't mind. I know the bias that's inherent in the standards. And I told the teacher, look, I used to be on the other side. Now I'm the administrator. I'm the gatekeeper. We're going to teach standards, yes. But we're also going to have the second notebook where we're going to teach actual history. And that gets me back to what Tamara was alluding to and talking about, and Dr. Kirk as well. That whole sectionality intersection piece is so crucial, because the way history and the teaching of history in our public schools and in the K-12 sector is really not history. What it is an interpretation of events and peoples and things of that nature. That doesn't make it accurate at all. So what we're doing is actually, our conversation is actually about teaching what actually occurred. We're not making this up that Columbus didn't discover America. We're not making that up. It's just that this is what was interpreted and pushed for an agenda. Just like the Confederate statues weren't placed in 1865 and 1866. They were built in 20s, 30s, 40s to speak to an agenda. So what we're doing is really correcting it. So we have to be careful. Yes, we got to navigate the politics, and we'll talk about that in the next second. But when we teach history accurately, that these are people making decisions on any given moment that turn on a dime because of whatever situation that person is facing with. Like, look at us now. COVID came. We are changing things in rapid speed.
Yes.
History wasn't a predetermined series of events. It could go on any number of ways and interpret it in many different ways based on who you are. Who you are is not just your color. It's not just your gender. It is your sexuality. It is your faith system, belief system. It is your age. It is your class. It's a slew of other things that I failed to mention. But the point is that if we teach it with that type of color, with that type of range, then guess what? You will have the celebrating of individual cultures. You will have the struggle and the protest that you have. And the great thing about it as a teacher, that if we don't teach it experientially, if we don't teach it in a C3 thing, we will be replaced. You will be able to take this, bottle it up on some ingenuity, and then we will all be replaced. So we need to teach in such a way. Otherwise, we will be out of a job, and we'll be saying, hey, like some of the robots will be like, hey, just like in the factories, we'll be sitting there doing something else. So let's think about that and teaching it in a way that's engaging and teaching accurate history so we can survive as well.
And I want to talk about COVID, because we've had this conversation over 3 weeks, and with that we've said that COVID has broken all the rules. There was a point where we said we couldn't give all kids free lunch. That was determined to be a lie, because now in COVID, kids are getting 3 meals a day. There was a point where we said, you must take a standardized test. We've determined that is a lie, because this past year they have been canceled, and this upcoming year they will probably be canceled. So we know that what we have known to be true is a lie. So how do teachers use this time? How do they use right now, June 2020, to get ready to teach history how it should be taught? And what do they need to be even more fearless in? And I'm saying this not as teachers do, but we're all in some part of education, right? How do we What do we do? Anybody?
I'll jump in. I think one of the things that I think is really important for social studies instruction is asking really good questions. Questions that drive students to do kind of the skill-based stuff that folks are talking about here, and as opposed to a specific piece of information. So thinking about, guys like Andrew Jackson, maybe, we talked about whether or not he should be on a $20 bill. Thinking about questions about the radicalness of the revolution, and whether or not was it truly a radical moment. Thinking about Reconstruction and thinking about, is it a failure or a success story? Like thinking about the questions that you're asking your kids. And I think that's from kindergarten to 12th grade, right? Like, and that drives the conversations that you're going to have in your classroom. And if you're asking good, robust questions, I think you get a lot of engagement. And I also think that you start thinking about building relevancy around the topics that you're discussing. How is there a link between what we're talking about today and what we're seeing on the front page of the newspaper or what we're seeing on our TV screens? And so I think that, as a social studies teacher, when I work with other social studies teachers, one of the things that we constantly talk about are the questions we're asking students to think about. And so, any other teacher, if you're an elementary school teacher that doesn't necessarily specialize in social studies, or you get a lot of pressure to do other things besides social studies, if you want your kids thinking and practicing good literacy skills, social studies questioning it's essential. It's going to make them better readers and writers. If they're thinking about the questions that are important from a historical perspective.
Love it. And Casey says, start with one small social studies project. And then Michaela says, as a white teacher, I don't fear my administration or leadership, but more if I hurt kids. I will try. But I fear tokening the few students that I have that are ethnically or linguistically diverse, or the few colleagues I have with whom I'd like to collaborate with. I don't want to speak on behalf of a community, ethnic, cultural, racial, religious. Can we speak to that? Because that's a valid concern, right?
Yeah, I'll jump in here again. I read that comment, and I am white, and so I understand that fear. And I think, I had an experience this year where I had good intentions, and I put a foot wrong on. It was actually the middle passage lesson that ended up working out really well. And a kid went home, talked to mom, and what I was shooting for and what came home were two different things. And I got an email and I got on the phone. And you can leave a situation like that and not address it, but you know what? That makes it worse. And that mom and I, we had a good conversation. We talked about what we were going to do the next day and where that was going in the grand scheme of things. And I don't know if it made a perfect relationship, but she at least trusted that I wasn't trying to diminish or her son or the history of people of color. And so I think that, understanding that none of us are perfect and none of us are going to hit all the marks in our classroom, and just being able to say, like, okay, if it's a parent or a kid and I mess it up, I can apologize. I can make that situation right. And I can build that relationship with people, because that's ultimately what teachers are, is people that build relationships with people. And so I think that you got to be able to say, admit fault when you're wrong and not feel like, and if you feel like you're trying to speak for a whole group of people, don't, because you're not going to win. You're not going to be able to do that. And that's, like, we've been talking about intersectionality. That's what intersectionality is. There's a lot of voices and none of us can speak for every individual. Like, it's not going to happen. And so if you feel like you're trying to do that, just stop.
Yeah. And I'm going to say this,
Can I address that real quick as well?
Go ahead.
Caring. We have to, if our kids and our parents and administration know that you care about kids, that you're really trying to teach kids to the best of your ability and that you're growing and learning, then when you encounter such a situation, it's going to be able to work itself out. So, but you have to show that you are about caring for that kid, that parent, that family, then things will work out in the end. So don't be afraid to that to the person who commented. Don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to step out. And yes, there's going to be some things that may not go quite as well as Adam has stated. But at the same time, do not stop, because again, the only thing that can control you, who can win, is fear itself. So don't let that stop you from trying, stepping out there. And then, like you said, own it. Hey, I made a mistake. Great. In fact, one time when I was teaching, I said, hey, kids, I was telling my kids this, look, I dare you to find something wrong in what I'm saying. I triple dare you. In fact, 100 to anybody who can. My goal was to motivate them to learn, to try to check me. That's what I wanted them to do.
Yeah.
So that if that's the culture and climate of your classroom of, hey, we're engaging, we're talking, we're learning, we're growing, then guess what? You can make a mistake and it's all within the same love, and then everything will be okay in the end.
I love that. Anybody else? And somebody said, Fran, question to ask time and time again, is your classroom teaching to the needs of your students? Be creative. And I was that teacher that I'm going to teach what I want to teach, right? Like not so much what my kids need. And so I took those risks. Everybody isn't at that point. And I've seen teachers genuinely scared. I have to ask, because I think her name was Michaela who said it. At South Atlanta, when I used to teach over there, we have a teacher, his name is Tom Dunn, and he is a former attorney, and he teaches history, actually teaches, law. And he's a white teacher, and the kids love him because he gives them the truth. And I think like that kids can see very clearly if you are giving it to them truthfully or are you sugarcoating it. And I think especially in high school, kids would prefer for you to be truthful about things, and then they respect, okay, they know their discipline. What else do you do trying to get to this? Anybody else?
As far as, I feel like I take on a lot of questions about being afraid in the classroom. And I've been teaching a long time, so I can still remember when I was afraid to do more things. Mm-hmm. I think what I want white teachers to understand is that your anti-racist journey is your anti-racist journey. If you are really focused in your anti-racist journey as it relates to your classroom presence on understanding where Black kids are coming from. I'm going to speak to the Black experience because I'm Black, right? Mm-hmm. So like, if you understand where Black kids are coming from and where Black parents are coming from, and you build the kind of relationship with them that they understand you, you don't have to worry about tokenizing them, because you won't tokenize them. Mm-hmm. When you're operating in this system where you're not really thinking about why you think what you think, you will tokenize kids, and you will do it wrong, and you will have a lot of apologies to make. It's a natural process to have apologies. I've made apologies to kids too. There's nothing wrong with apologizing. But I find when I'm having these conversations, panel, and I don't know what you feel about this, but I find that the fear part of it comes more from white educators and Black educators. Like, I'll hear Black educators say, I'll lose my job. White people are like, I don't know how to do. And I'm like, the problem of racism in schools is going to be fixed largely by white people with Black people informing you about racism. That's how it's going to get done. We can't have all the white people be afraid. But another thing I wanted to say about something you had mentioned before, we were talking about standards. Friends, the standards are inherently racist. I'm going to say it again for the folks in the back. The standards are inherently racist. They are not anti-racist. So when you are looking at liberatory pedagogy in a classroom, you are going to have to vet the standards even down to the K level. The way you teach citizenship helps students view people who are non-citizens either as human beings or not. We are framing that at the K level. The way we talk about symbols and what symbols we appreciate and admire, that's taught at first grade level. When we teach the states, when we teach the migration of groups around this country, and we fail to teach children why people moved around this country or why people came from someplace else to here, what were the circumstances, because it's not in the standards, this is why we're not moving kids forward. The standards are inherently racist. So elementary school teachers, I'm calling y'all in. We all need to be looking at these standards because Florida's getting new ones. And I'm looking at them right now and they're terrible. The social studies standards are racist, racist, racist. The texts that they're using in middle and high school are all going back to the classics, which is code for all white people, all white authors. Y'all, if we don't start vetting this stuff now, we will not be prepared when we go back to school to fight it. Everything we do is a fight. Teaching is inherently political. And if you don't know that teaching is political, I don't know how to help you, but like teaching is political. We've got to know our standards well enough to know what we're dismantling. That's actually what we're dismantling in schools, is the way that kids get brought information. We want to bring it in a new way. That's why I loved what Kina was saying so much about how he teaches his learners. Like, I learned so much from you. I could just do a whole podcast listening to you. Like, there's so much richness there in not trying to form everything by something we were told what to do. We're letting the kids tell us, these are the things that are valuable for us. These are the things we want to fight for. These are the things we want to learn how to advocate for. There's just so much power in that, you guys. And we can still do that to some extent in the public school system. I'm praying for us this year that this is our year that we really break some things open and do some amazing things in the public school. I'm praying for all of us.
And I think, when you're talking around tell the truth and inherently the standards are excluding specific people, teachers also need to get into the rooms when these standards are created. Because I see a lot of people who say, oh, it's my summer, not going to do it. Or, oh, I don't want to do that. Not knowing this is how power comes to be when you're constructing these, and that you have to be in the room and you have to be the person that says, that's not accurate. We have to keep that. So I think that's important. I want to ask you guys this, and we're going to wrap this up. Going into this upcoming year, what is your plan to make sure that somebody says on us? What is your plan to give them a rigorous social studies curriculum in whatever phase that you're in? Or how do you do that?
I'll jump right in, Fran. I'm going to do that by writing for you. I'm going to write more articles for the educators' room that are heavily researched, that really answer some of the great questions that have been surfaced in these chats over the last 3 weeks together, to really go deeper in these topics so that they can be shared with the amazing community that you've cultivated and created right here.
Anybody else?
Go ahead, Adam. Go ahead, Adam.
So I'm kind of in a transition moment here. So I'm getting an opportunity to start fresh because I'm going back to high school, going back to a new school. It's been a long time since I've taught 11th grade U.S. history. And so I'm getting a chance to, listen to a lot of conversations in my community and around the country. And I get a chance to go into, it's actually interesting because I'll finish 8th grade history where I am with Reconstruction, and I'll pick up 11th grade right as Reconstruction is ending. So I'm going to get an interesting chance to be pretty well equipped to remind my 11th graders about where they should have left off when they were in 8th grade. And so I kind of am looking forward to making those strong connections between those earlier moments in our history, Civil War era, Revolutionary War era, to what's going to happen as we go into the progressive movement, and try to bring some parallels to the progressive movement, the civil rights movement in the 60s, to what we see going on right now in America. That got to a point that somebody, I think Ms. Washington made earlier about relevancy in education, right? And relevancy in the social studies classroom. The reason we're doing this stuff in social studies is because what happened 100 years ago, it didn't just happen and we forgot about it. And we just get reminded of it in social studies classroom. It matters because it directly applies to what we have created here in this system. And so I'm looking forward to trying to do that, to bridge that gap as I go into my classroom. And I'll be, again, one of the things over the last couple of years, looking to highlight authors of color, and trying to make a very conscious effort to do that. And I think that, I think as teachers, sometimes we get somebody put in the chat, like you get into the habit of using the same sources. Oh, this one worked well. The kids liked it.
Yeah.
And trying to challenge yourself to say, hey, I'm going to go out and I'm going to find a different version of this or a different account or somebody different telling this story than the person I used last year. And for me this year, since I'll be going fresh again, I'll get a lot of those chances. So I hope everybody does too, though.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm going to do is put myself out there now. Now that I'm no longer in a building, my goal is to get out there and support other educators in this way, to support, to be in that room when they're deciding the standards for the future. I want to be in that room and actually be a part of that conversation and develop it. And then also support teachers and administrators in a way to say, hey, I know you may not have the time to do all of the research to learn, then hey, I'll put the book together for you and let you just go ahead. I'll copy it for you and say, hey, here, I'll tell you where to copy it, so you won't have to do all that work. So that's what I want to do, is be that resource and that advocate for teachers, educators, and administrators.
Yeah.
I'll jump in too and say I've been on the curriculum mapping team for my district 6 or 7 times in the last 16 years. But I'm going to tell you, one of the things that I feel like needs to happen too is that white teachers, you need to start to spend your privilege. When you get asked to show up at these things, you need to look around the room and start asking the stakeholders, where are the Black people? Where are the Latinx people? Is anybody on this committee from the LGBTQ community? Anybody? And then when they tell you, we really want you, but we don't have anything like that, then you tell them, then I'm going to have to go. That's what you do. That's what you do. Because when we talk about sacrificing things, Black people, Latinx people, folks in the LGBTQ community have been advocating for equal rights for everybody, including poor white people, for eons, right? And everybody has been benefiting from that. Y'all need to be okay with sometimes saying, you know what, I'm just not going to do this opportunity. And then I'm going to call you out publicly and say, this is not diverse and it's not intersectional, and y'all need to do better. If you're teaching children, it needs to be diverse and intersectional. So over the years in the position that I've had as a curriculum, as a teacher on an advisory board for the curriculum mapping in my district, I have always said, is it going to be diverse? Okay, well, who do I need to talk to? I could drop you some names, and then I give them some names of people that they should ask to come on board. Why? Because if I get an opportunity, it's my job to start to pull others up into that opportunity as well. And I'm Black and I'm getting to do that, which is an amazing thing in my district because it's lily white. There are no Black leaders in my district, not on the school board, not in my district. I think there's like 3 people of color in my district, maybe 1 Black person who works at the district office. My district is lily white. So these opportunities for me have been huge. And I say that to say as an encouragement to you, it can be done, but it also, I've encouraged my white colleagues to do the same things that I've done. You need to call people in and you need to say, this room is not diverse. It's not representing all of the kids in our district, the ideas of the parents in our district, or our schools. You guys have got to do a better job with that. When you get opportunities to speak up on things like standards or alignment or curriculum mapping in your districts, you need to insist that those opportunities be diverse and intersectional. And if they're not, you leave.
Yeah.
Fran, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Hey, I'm back. Fran, I just so love what Tamara said. Adam, being a younger teacher, I appreciate your boldness. Hodge, I've always had mad respect for what you are doing inside and outside of the school. And Fran, you were a rock star at my school. So one thing I would say is go into this new year, man, bold. See, one thing I thought about as I was disconnected earlier is that working with inner city kids more specifically, but I think it's almost like growing grass. You know, you can't go into the school year on August saying that you're going to teach anti-racism. So one of the things I think about when I'm thinking about how do we teach through the lens of anti-racism, think about doing your lawn. People start aerating the lawn in the off season. So that means they're digging up the soil before they ever even see any grass. And then once the grass started growing, they come in, they see some weed, they start spraying the weeds, they're killing the weeds. Then they actually call out True Green, Kimlon, or whoever, and then they start getting the fertilizer and stuff put on it. So we do all of that just for grass. But when it comes to students, we will come in and go in that same filing cabinet that we've been using for 30 years and pull out the same lessons. So one of the things that I think all of you guys can appreciate is the COVID-19 was so awesome for me because I had some students during this COVID-19, during the virtual school, to bring their parents on the call every single day. I did not have to type into the computer who I called and what comments I left or whatnot. It was organic. And these parents, man, were like, Mr. Walker, I see why these kids love your classroom. And I told them, I said, no, it's not my classroom. It's a liberated space. So one of my favorite students, she saw me at the bus stop, the MARTA stop this summer. She's a white young lady who's in the LGBT community. And when she stopped me, she hugged me. And I know the black people at that bus stop probably think this old black man messing with this young white girl. But then she told him, she said, no, this is my school dad right here. And this girl probably did the most exciting Black history poem I've ever heard in my life. And she was only able to pull it off because she was a white woman, as well as a white woman in the LGBT community who spoke truth to power because I had given her that liberated space to be who she was. So how did this culminate? When I go into this new season, based on what I learned from the students during my virtual classroom, I had two students I want to mention real quickly. Brandon, he was more aloof. He was introverted. He did not even talk in my class. During the COVID-19 virtual classroom, Brandon became an IT guy. He taught me to get on my computer if I lost something on the phone. He taught the students, like if I gave an assignment and I asked the students to circle it on a worksheet, I'm like, is it any way, man, for the people who are not here, for them to do this and they can upload it to me so we can just see it and put it on the screen and let them take over the presentation? Brandon did all of that stuff. And by the time the semester was over with, I said, brother, what happened to you? Like, why were you this powerful in the virtual classroom, but you did not do that in the brick and mortar? He said, well, Mr. Walker, I've always wanted to be in IT because my brother went to college to do IT. He said, I love computers and whatnot. He said, that's why in your room, you oftentimes see me on the phone. He said, and I love your class because you're not like the teacher who say, put your phone up. Because I have this thing where I tell them, friend, nobody sits with their phone like this on that side. You can't see me move my hand down. But you know if a student is using their phone to text or if they're using their phone to do something. He said, and what happened in this virtual classroom, you empowered me to be a leader. So going into the new classroom, I did this right here. I asked all of my students when we did World War I, I changed the script. I told them I want y'all to think about Little Baby or anybody who's doing music. I want you to think about your favorite movie. I want you guys to use a movie to tell me how the people had to feel in Germany when they had to go to and do the Treaty of Versailles. And this is what I will leave you guys with. Sasha, one of my rock star babies. This girl is from Four Seasons. If any of y'all know about Atlanta, y'all know that is over in the hood. That's neighborhood Crips. They are all the way live. It's blue all day, every day. Sasha said, Mr. Walker, I got it. This is how we're going to do the Treaty of Versailles. She said, the people had to be mad. She said, so the movie I want to use to explain this to everybody is the Central Park 5. I said, wow, that's interesting. Why Central Park 5? Y'all notice I didn't say I told them a movie to use. She chose this movie on her own. She said because they wanted to make those boys sign off on something saying they had raped this white woman and beat her, but they didn't do it. I said, expound, keep going. So I said, does everybody get what she's talking about, her talk about? She said, yeah. She said, think about this. When Germany said they had to pay for all of the damages done during the war, imagine having to pay for something and you did not do it. And this when I jumped in as the guy. I said, can you imagine those black parents who could not afford attorneys, whose babies are sitting in jail, and now the only way they can get them out is to sign off on something, like taking a plea. And they got to sign off on this thing saying, we're guilty of this, even though they know somebody else had done it. Now, I just say all that to say what I would do is I would turn more of the reins over to the students and allow them to use their genius. Once again, I will allow them to awaken their own genius, use music. I will allow them to use movies and whatever medium they want to use in order to help me to help them. That's what I'm going to do going in, and I will enhance my technological skills as well.
I love it. I love the analogy of growing grass because it's true. You know, we're growing something more important than grass. We're growing minds. So before we leave, because we can talk all night, and they know this. I want you to talk about, just flash the book, 1 minute, a book that has changed the way you teach. And it can be, if you don't have it, it's fine. You can put it in the comments. But I'm going to start with We Want to Do More Than Survive by Bettina Love. This is my homegirl in my head. It is an easy read. It is a great read. And it really talks about you not being afraid. Abolitionist teaching. And I think that every person, black, white, brown, green, should read it because it really, really talks about what we have to do to stop being afraid. Anybody else?
First of all, Fran took my book. Have you had that moment in class before where like they took my answer, but thankfully I have another book. I have Teaching for Black Lives. And so if you guys are not familiar with Zen Education Project or Rethinking Schools, they put out some amazing resources. And so this has a ton of ideas. Now, like I said, I teach elementary school, but if you're doing this and using this and cross-referencing with articles that you're reading, or maybe you want to cross-reference it with a different like historical text, this can give you some great context for like lost history, things that we're not really teaching, or give you an idea of how to teach it more from a liberatory mindset. So this is the one I'm suggesting.
Absolutely.
This book is one that everyone you have to read this.
Mm-hmm.
Every American, there is no question. There is no question. You have to read the book stamped from the beginning. This, everyone has that book that just changes your life because it alters your world perspective. And I'm so thankful that this year I found another edition. I'm a English teacher, avid reader, but this book right here goes far beyond any piece of nonfiction I've ever read. This is the best piece of nonfiction that I have read since reading The Emperor of All Maladies, biography of cancer. That was up until now the number one nonfiction book, but this is now taking the cake, and it's so perfect. It's so timely. Many Americans are reading Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi, but you have to read this book. If you are a Black person, you have to read the book to understand how your thinking has been conditioned to force you into being an assimilationist, and how you have to break those chains to move into becoming an anti-racist. And if you are a white person, you have to read this book to understand how things have happened that you thought were normal and right that were absolutely wrong. So you can move from being either a segregationist into an assimilationist, or from an assimilationist to an anti-racist. You have to read the book, especially if you are a history teacher. It is the most valid and important book about history that I have ever seen. So for those who reference things like Lies My Teacher Told Me and all these other great books, this book takes that concept to the 13th degree. You must read it.
Love it.
My book would definitely be Black Students, Middle Class Teachers by Jawanza Kunjufu. Many of you guys might have heard about Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys and some other books that he's written. But I would say that book right there, it has nothing to do with what content you teach, has nothing to do with your race, it has nothing to do with your sexual preference. It basically deals with Black students and brown students, but Black students specifically, and middle class teachers. I think once you read that, it helps you to understand what Van Kurt mentioned.
You're breaking up, Kenya. So, Kenya, I'm gonna let him come back. Can somebody pick up where he's at? Because I want him to type the book in the chat. Haj or Adam, you guys can go because I think his internet's messing up.
Sure. You asked for a book that changed my teaching. I think I'm going to take, I don't have it with me. I didn't know that we were going this route, but Copper's Son by Sharon Draper it's not like, it's a historical fiction book. And it just, when you read a book like that, that book is an incredible book because it makes, when you're writing a book for young adults, it's a young adult historical fiction novel, and it just boils a lot of the conflicts down to an incredibly simplistic and I don't know what the word exactly is I'm looking for, but it's just incredibly moving. And I think as a history teacher, it personalized the dehumanization of people in a way that was powerful for me as a teacher, but I think even more so really powerful for students. So that may be a book that teachers want to consider in a not just for themselves, but for students too. Because my kids, they devour it. Kids that read that book devour that book. So Copper's Son by Sharon Draper is one of my most important books.
Well, Adam, thank you for that book. And thank you also for all of the books. They really, some books I haven't read, heard of. Like I heard about Stamped from the Beginning, but not haven't read it. But Keenan, you back. You want to go ahead and keep go ahead and continue your thought, man.
Yes, thank you, Hard. Yeah, once again, the book was Black Students, Middle Class Teachers. And what I was saying before I was cut off was that it doesn't matter what your section is, what content area you're teaching in. What it basically focuses on is something that I heard Dr. Kirk say on the last, I think part 2, he talked about empathy. I think it was him or maybe somebody else, empathy versus sympathy. And one of the things that people do, and here's that whole thing that oftentimes white teachers do, you start sympathizing with black kids. I don't care if a black kid is going through the worst struggle in the world. Those kids are not looking for your sympathy. They just want you to empathize. So when you wake up in the morning and get in your car and you're driving from whatever side of town you're coming from, regardless of your race, and you had a hot breakfast, or your kids had a hot breakfast, think about that child that you're leaving the home with versus a kid who's coming to you, he didn't eat until yesterday at South Atlanta. So his next meal will come when he get back to South Atlanta. So this book teaches you how to actually navigate working with black students and change your middle class mindset. So I think every educator at all levels should read Black Students, Middle Class Teachers.
Okay.
Let me piggyback on that. There's two books that I want to talk about, but one in particular, Understanding Poverty. Understanding Poverty is a whole culture of teaching, and that builds and continues that whole concept of black student middle class teachers. So yes, there's a total dichotomy, is a difference when we ride in from the county and coming into Bankhead to start teaching and administrating. Totally different concept, and really puts you in a perspective of, do I know, if I did not have a meal, do I know where to go? Do I know where the kitchen is, the food kitchen is? Do I know if I needed to get some money, where I can go get some real quick? Do I know any type of resources that if I don't have money, where can I get those resources? And those are some of the things that we have to change our mindset and teach in a different kind of way based on that experience. Yes, Understanding Poverty and Ruby Payne is definitely the book that I'm talking about. Now, there's other books that, and everybody can critique Understanding Poverty as a concept, but it definitely has some areas of strength. But the other book that I really think that deals with racism, that really is Faces at the Bottom of the Well, The Permanence of Racism by Derek Bell. It's an easy read, maybe about 120 pages. But what it does, yes, it talks about slavery, talks about racism, but it also talks about, there's one particular chapter, and they did an HBO special on it, talking about Afro-Atlantica and talk about African Americans. And because of this experience of slavery and discrimination, made a special type of people that then can rise and do things that no other person can, because of this unique set of experiences. So I wanted it to be, it's an easy read. It's a fictional, historical fiction piece. And it's really a good book that's still something worth reading even now. So it's Faces at the Bottom of the Well, The Permanence of Racism by Derek Bell, and Understanding Poverty by Ruby Payne.
These are all, guys, this is what happens when you have teachers who are in the work, doing the work, talking about the work, and each week it gets better. Next week, on July the 10th, we're going to talk about changing the hearts of resistant teachers. So if you have an educator where you work in a school system, like Tamara has told us when she first started working in some of her schools, where it's hard for you to change the hearts of teachers, we're going to talk about that. Somebody said, looks like my Amazon card is about to be full. We thank each and every one of you guys. Kenya, Adam, Zach, Tamara, Haj. Y'all, these are rock stars. And this is what it is. These conversations, I get tons of conversations during the week. I'm sorry, text messages during the week where people are saying, this is awesome. This has helped. If you want to watch the last 2 talks, you can go to our YouTube channel and I'll put it here. And we will see you back again next Friday at 7 o'clock Eastern. Have a good night. Bye, guys.